Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll just wait maybe one more minute whilst a few other people are joining us, and then we'll get started. Thank you for joining us today. A couple more people waiting in the waiting room. Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome, greetings, everyone. There are other colleagues that are joining us, but I think that the time has come, and I think we'll get started. So, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dr. Gary Smith, and I'm the president of the Faculty of Homeopathy, for those of you that don't know me. And it's wonderful to see so many people joining us for this event, both here in the UK and lots of different countries around the world. Great to see lots of familiar faces. You're very, very welcome indeed. Thank you for joining us. This event is being recorded. The webinar is being recorded, just to let you know that, and the recording will be made available to everyone shortly afterwards, over the next little while. So if you're watching the recording, welcome. Also, thank you very much for joining us today. This is I think this is the fifth webinar in a series of webinars that we've been holding that represents a collaboration between the Faculty of Homeopathy and Vithoulkas Compass. And I'd like to say again how pleased I am to be collaborating in this way and providing these sessions. And thank you again to our friends and colleagues at Vithoulkas Compass for their support of the Faculty of Homeopathy. As you know, our speaker today is our good friend Andrew Ward, who is well known to, I think, most, if not all of us. Andrew is the UK ambassador for Vithoulkas Compass. And maybe just ask if everyone can make sure their microphones are muted, because we don't quite want the discussion quite as early as this. We can have a discussion later, but not now. So please make sure your microphone is muted. Yes, Andrew is the UK ambassador for Vithoulkas Compass. Very, very busy practitioner, and has been in practice for over 30 years in both the NHS and the private sector, and has been closely associated with the International Academy for Classical Homeopathy, and has been dedicated to raising the standard of homeopathic practice and homeopathic education. And it's great to welcome Andrew to this event today. So his subject today, he's going to be presenting a case of chronic febrile illness treated with classical homeopathy, as you can see. And as we know, it is crucial that febrile illnesses and fevers are managed appropriately, safely, responsibly, in a non-suppressive way. So I think this is such an important subject, and I have a feeling this case might just illustrate those principles very nicely. And Andrew will be obviously demonstrating particularly how using the Vithoulkas Compass software can help in choosing and prescribing the correct homeopathic medicine. So I'm really looking forward to this presentation, and I hope everyone finds it interesting and informative, and so welcome again. If you have questions for Andrew, then please pop them into the chat box at the bottom of the screen, and please make sure your microphone's muted again, and pop the questions in the chat box, and then afterwards we'll put those questions to Andrew after the presentation's over. So I don't think I've anything more to say at this point, other than thanks again, and I will hand over now to Andrew. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary, for that very nice introduction as usual. I'm very pleased to be presenting this fifth in the series of working on what works in homeopathy in conjunction with our friends at Vithoulkas Compass and in association with the Faculty of Homeopathy. As Gary was saying, I think I chose this case really because over the last few years, with what's been going on with COVID and post-COVID and long COVID, and etc., we're all seeing a lot of cases where quite a lot of people are not recovering fully. They're developing chronic conditions and sometimes these recurring febrile illnesses as well. This case, however, goes back to 2014, but I thought would be a good illustration of the principles involved in homeopathy, and as Gary was saying about suppression of fever, suppression of acute febrile illness, and the consequences of that in chronic health conditions, or we could say subacute, in this case subacute or chronic conditions. So I'll start with this. I have here, if you can see the screen, so I've got all the history here. You can see this was in 2014. This 29-year-old man presented with a chronic recurring febrile illness. It would occur roughly every 3 to 4 months over the last 3 years, so since 2011. And in this case, I think the chronology of this case is it shows how important it is to take detailed case taking of the chronology of how exactly everything developed, as you'll see, because we have to reverse this process. So this man, I remember, presented. He was very mild-mannered, quiet, sensitive type of man. He was a musician. I remember a very specific instrument, I think, the lute, I think it was called, very, very niche market of music, working with various orchestras. I remember him being very lean. He was very thin. And although he was 29 years old, he had extensive loss of hair, male pattern baldness. So the symptoms he presented with in the acute phases of this illness were cold and flu-like symptoms, and they would last for about a week. Mild feverishness, never went very high, usually around 37, something like this. Foggy head, so a difficulty thinking, and headaches. So these would come together every few months. Now, the history of his case. In 2000, when 15 years old, he'd had a bad case of tonsillitis, and then glandular fever was diagnosed. And then in 2003, he developed mumps at university. All these were with high fever at this time. And the key time in his case was 2006, when he developed a viral infection in Brazil traveling with a very high fever. It was over 40 degrees. And he was treated with antibiotics and some anti-fever drugs at the time. He doesn't really remember what they were. He then came back to the UK still with this condition. And he was tested at the Tropical Disease Hospital in London, and they couldn't find anything. So in 2009, he developed a depression whilst at university and got put onto antidepressants. This then led to an bad outbreak of acne on the face, and he was given antibiotics, which then suppressed it. And in 2011, this chronic or subacute recurrent febrile illness is started. And then in 2012, he developed shingles and was given an antiviral, which also suppressed this. So this brings us to the current time when I saw him, of his state where his organism was struggling to overcome this condition that would recur every 3 to 4 months. His state of mind at the time, he was very despairing of that he would ever get better from this condition. He described himself as a very fastidious and careful person. He didn't particularly like to be in overheated rooms, but also was affected by cold air and drafts. He had, unfortunately, quite a strong anxiety with performing as a musician, very nervous on stage. And especially since he'd had all these things, a strong anxiety about his health and about his future with this condition. Some grinding of teeth in sleep. Sometimes an odd sensation of a hair on the tongue, which he described quite well. This would come occasionally. Also, he'd noticed a difficult concentration in the last year, so showing that his mental level had been affected somewhat recently. Cautious in nature, rather indecisive. So this is how he presented. So, if I show you here, we see the repertorization that I took. I actually took quite a lot of symptoms. It's not always necessary to take so many, but with this system, with Compass, as long as you're putting in the real symptoms, then it's okay to put in a number of symptoms. The remedy should still be coming to the fore for us to be able to differentiate which remedy we think is correct. So we see here we have some mind symptoms, anxiety about the future, health, carefulness, which is how he described himself, very careful, difficulty concentration recently, conscientious. So this is the being careful and tidy about things. Despair of recovery is strong. And here we have this, what we would call foggy mind. We can use this rubric: dullness, sluggishness, difficulty of thinking, comprehending. And indecision, irresolution. Mildness, again, his nature, and the shyness appearing in public on stage. So we have quite a few symptoms here. Here we have the degree. Those of you who are familiar with Compass, you can change the degrees here. If you think, no, this was much stronger, we need to put it. Actually, I won't let do it now, but anyway, if at the time you can change the degree. And you have some other options here, which I'm sure most of you know, but you can sort your symptoms according to certain criteria by chapter. I tend to do it by chapter, but you can sort it by degree, which would put all the 3rd degree symptoms at the top, and then running down to 2nd and 1st degree. Some people like to see it in this way. I prefer the chapters, so starting with mind. I think I mentioned before, you can merge symptoms if you thought that certain things, for instance, I'll edit it now, but you can merge, say you wanted to merge carefulness and irresolution or mildness. If you think that two rubrics are very similar, you can merge them into one at this place here. Okay. Now, what's happened to the... What's happened to the case? Symptoms and case notes. Oh, okay, here we go. Yes. So we see with this repertorization, we go to results. And here we have a case that was clearly a choice between silica and Burita carbonica. Both remedies, actually, here we can see how many symptoms the remedies cover. So you see with silica, it's 15 out of 17. It's almost the whole case. And then it shows you what's not present compared with Burita. Also 15. Slightly different symptoms not present. So here we have some metadata. This is a nice addition to Compass, which gives some very interesting comparative information from various sources from Professor Vithoulkas and various classical authors. So it'll distinguish between the types of fears of Burita, for instance, and silica, ambrogresia, remedies that are similar in their fears, for instance, lycopodium, silica. So for instance, shyness in silica contains an intellectual trait and is expressed mostly in public, especially when she or he has to perform exactly his case. And this comes from George. So this is very useful. So we see here, actually, the choice is pointing with Compass, despite the fact that they have the same amount of symptoms, that silica is actually the remedy that is being made clear in this case, for various reasons, one of which is that we often prescribe on keynotes, and there are several keynotes in this case that point towards silica rather than Burita. Burita carbonica, for instance, doesn't have this symptom of hair on the tongue, which is a very peculiar symptom. And Hahnemann told us in the organon very clearly to take a special note of the characteristic and peculiar and strange symptoms in a case. So this one is a very strange symptom, and it's very typical of silica. We see here, 4th degree, this peculiar symptom. Also, this symptom, the specific symptom of being very shy, although Burita can be very shy, it's not included in this public speaking rubric. Otherwise, the remedies are very similar. We see here they can both be shy, they can have the dullness, they can have this symptom. Both remedies have this symptom of losing hair early on in a young age, and irresolution, indecision, etc. So of course, in any repertorization, these systems are not there to tell us which remedy to take or to give the patient. It's to give us information and data and ideas about how to differentiate. It's our job to be looking at the details of the case and to compare remedies and to really see which one is more suited to the patient. So this is the idea, not to give us the answer, but to give us prompts for the case. And of course, you could be using this system with the patient. And at this point, you would be able to use this differential analysis, which I've shown before, which very cleverly gives a set of questions that helps you to differentiate with the patient at the time. So if you were not sure, you would say, Burita, they don't like fruit. Like Ignatia, they don't like fruit very much. So you could ask, do you eat fruit? And you see here, it's something they don't like. They may say, yes, I like fruit. So you need to ask about some other things. Confidence, you see both remedies lack confidence. Drafts, which he was sensitive, is more of a silica symptom and not burrito. This is another differential. You can ask about injections. It may be a question that you never asked or they never thought to say to you. And you say, do you fear needles? And they thought, I can't bear them. And immediately you have your answer. Biting nails. So many of these things apply to both. And also down here, you can ask more questions. If you haven't got them there, you can go to the specific keynotes of each remedy. You see and say, right, yes, constipation. Yes, the smelly feet. You can ask some questions about silica to confirm your remedy. So it's all very interactive, ideal to be using with the patient when they're there with you. So in this case, I prescribed silica 200, one dose. And this was December the 9th. I think he had the remedy. And he reported in the follow-up that 10 days after the remedy, he developed an aggravation of fever that went up to 39 degrees. So remember, in his case, the last time he'd had a high fever was with the infection in Brazil. Then it had all got suppressed and he'd gone into this subacute state. Immediately after the remedy, he produces a high fever with nausea, cough and headache. And he said it was very similar. It reminded him of the illness he had in Brazil. So it was like a return of the illness, but not as severe. So you see what happens in these cases is that previously he was able to mount a high fever. He was in a higher level of health. We would say in upper group, it all got suppressed and he went down to in the levels of health, which I'll discuss a bit at the end, probably level 7, where only very mild fevers can happen, but you go into a chronic state or subacute recurring state. So immediately after remedy, he's jumped back up into a higher group. This is what the fever tells us. Then after this, a few days after this, a new symptom appeared, always very important after a remedy. And this symptom was he started to feel very hungry at night. In the night, he would wake up and want to eat a sandwich. New symptom, strange. So we need to take note of this. Also, he tends to eat large amounts of food, but stays very thin. Let's go back here. Here we are. Nausea. Hunger at night. Also, very chilly. He's feeling very cold these days. He gave some more information. The headaches were better for eating. So at this point, I had an idea of what was presenting itself. But there are two questions that needed to be asked at this point, because what we're seeing here is a new remedy picture emerging, what this is telling us with a new symptom, with a good aggravation, and then a new symptom appearing. We need to see if this is a new picture. And two questions to ask were, do you ever feel very well just before the acute state comes on? And did you ever have scabies? Because at this point, I was thinking with this symptom about the remedy Serenum, the nosode, very chilly, very thin, hunger at night, and a lot of suppression. So here we're justified to ask these questions, because again, it may be something he would never say or never think to say. And actually, to my surprise, he answered yes to both questions, so that he was aware that before the acute state comes up, he feels exceptionally well for a few days and then goes down. This is very typical of Serenum. It's the only remedy to produce this, this symptom. And also, he'd admitted to tell me that actually in 2006, after coming back from Brazil, he'd contracted scabies. And this was treated very aggressively with an insecticide topical lotion in London and got suppressed. So it's interesting in his case, if you remember, here we see scabies. In 2009, he develops depression. And this confirms a lot of what Hahnemann told us in chronic diseases and about Sora and Serenum and the importance, the process of the suppression of Sora deeper into the system. And then it's starting to affect him on an emotional level with a depression. And then, of course, all this acne came out, everything got suppressed again. And then a year and a half later or so, he develops this chronic illness. So you see the progression from one thing to another from this suppression. So what do we expect with this? We need to look at the next repertorization. Do this. I have to close this one. Yeah. So here's the second repertorization based on his follow-up. So he still has some of these anxieties and the recovery, despair, and the irresolution. Here's the symptom. Feels very well before worse. Headache, better eating. Hungry at night. Suppression of scabies. And here we see very clear, nearly all the symptoms now pointing towards Serenum. Here we can see, we want to look at the materia medica of Serenum. If we're not familiar with it, we can immediately go and see, this is a unique feature of Compass, which is George Vithoulkas notes. The only place you'll see these gives a good essence of, and you see here his state, anxiety about future, despair of recovery, anxious about health, the chilliness, hungry, better eating. You see it's all here. So, Serenum 200C, January the 6th, 1 dose. The follow-up was in March. What was interesting in his case here, he immediately produced some itchy marks and spots on the skin for 1 week. This resembled his original scabies, but less severe. So the organism brings out the scabies again, but in a lesser form. And since then, he said, I felt very fine in myself. He's noticed his mind cleared, became more focused, not so worried about his future or his health. He used to think, another thing he hadn't said, he used to think he was being punished by God with this illness. But this feeling is gone. This is a symptom of calibramatum. Those a few know. He feels he can multitask now. He brought back an old symptom, tingling in the arms and hands. This is a good sign. Appetite good, but no longer at night. And he's had no more of the bouts of chronic febrile illness. And then in July, I followed up with him, feeling very good, had a mild cold, but it went by itself. So we see his level has really moved up to a point where his organism just throws off a cold with no problem. So he's gone from 3rd group level 7 up. He also said he had increased sexual awareness, accepting his sexuality, which was another issue, more confident in general, sleeping better, no more fevers. So what we see here is that he started, if we look at it in terms of his levels of health, he started in good health, good level as a child with tonsillitis, high fever, even at 15 years old. Then he had glandular fever and mumps, all with high fever. But it was this illness in Brazil where the fever stopped. And it was at this point he started to go down. It took a little time for it to appear, but also at the same time, he'd suppressed the scabies, which is a very serious thing to do. And after the correct remedies, as we see a return of the high fever, return of the original illness, and a return of the scabies. And this puts him back up into group 1. So we see that the scabies and fever, we have to see these return in order for the patient to be cured. And also that we needed 2 remedies in this case, silica to start the case. This then led to the development of some new symptoms that pointed the way to actually the deeper remedy, if you like, that was needed. So it's this idea you need a succession of remedies in order to cure a chronic case. In this case, only 2, but they need to be in the right order. Giving Serenum first won't work. It has to be silica first, then Serenum. So being led by the organism and the symptoms that are produced, not by what we think. This phenomena, for those who know, you'll find in the organon, which I hope you all read regularly. and 177 to 180. This is where he explains this phenomenon nicely about partial simillimum, particularly in rubric 180. Where you give an indicated remedy, partially indicated remedy, and the organism produced some more symptoms that point towards the next one. And this is a very useful mechanism for us, and one we should be aware of. And also 78 to 82 is where he talks about chronic disease, miasms, and sora and the suppression. So worth having a reread of all this, and I would suggest reading Chronic Diseases again if you haven't read it, to really understand the theory that he came up with. Okay. I think that's the case. Yeah. So I think we can go to any questions now, if people have some. You want to...
Andrew, thanks again for a fantastic presentation. As always, it's excellent. And it was a very interesting case. We have quite a few questions actually here, and I will read them out to you. But before I do, I would also like to thank Dr. Gary Smith for the great pleasure and the honor of collaborating with us, and for opening and closing this webinar as always. Thank you so much, Gary. So let us go to the questions. Just a second, I'll go. So there is one question. The first question is from Padelis, and he asks if your patient had taken the MMR vaccine.
Yes. What's the question?
The question is if your patient had taken the MMR vaccine. Was he vaccinated?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, you don't know. Okay.
No.
So next question is from Lily Samardic, and she asks the following. I'd like to know the words he used in expressing his symptoms and how the mental symptoms rubrics were chosen according to what he expressed.
Okay. Well, I think I put here his main symptoms. Of course, we interpret patients' language into rubrics, don't we? Patients don't come in and say, "Oh, I have a despair of recovery," like this. It's not their language, but they'll be talking in ways where you see they're very anxious about their health, and they'll say something like, "Oh, I don't think I'm ever going to recover from this. I think maybe I'll always have this kind of despairing attitude." So we use despair of recovery. I won't get better. Will I get better? They say, "Doctor, will I get better? Promise me I'll get better." These kind of questions, there's a despair in it. Other mental symptoms, I seem to remember talking about his work, as a musician. He was a very careful person, very detailed. This is also something that we associate with silica. We see that they have a carefulness and how can we say a little bit obsessive, so they can focus on a specific thing very easily, and they're cautious people. So asking him about his nature, he said, "I'm very cautious." But also the anxiety about stage was a very straightforward question. he doesn't like to perform. He says he gets very nervous and very anxious about this health condition. So these kind of comments. Yeah.
Okay. The same person, Lily, again has another question, and she asks, why not repeat another dose of silica?
Silica. Yeah. Well, it's a good question, but according to our rules, if you like, in classical homeopathy, once you've given, and this is logical steps, once you've given a remedy that's indicated and has acted, as the silica did, he had an aggravation and the picture started to change. Many of the silica symptoms, well, some of them had gone, some were still there, but we were seeing some new symptoms belonging to another remedy. Here, as we see, Hahnemann tells us, and experience shows that once that remedy is clear enough, you can prescribe on it. So once you've given a remedy that's acted, logically, you don't need to repeat it, as the symptoms are they're no longer in a silica position. It's moved, it's changed. So why would you repeat silica? You only repeat a remedy if it hasn't acted, or it's relapsed. It's acted and relapsed back to silica.
Okay. So now we have another question from Georgiana Rackler, and she asks the following. May we take into consideration symptoms which were not recent changes in personality, for example, mildness, etc.? Can we take these into consideration?
We can. We shouldn't base the prescription on this, because we could say mildness is a personality trait. But when we're taking mental symptoms, let's have a look at mildness. So you see, and what does it mean as a mental symptom, mildness? It has to be, to use it in your repertorization, it has to be something you would consider pathological. Well, there's nothing wrong in being a mild person. It's not a symptom. But if it's too much, if it's part of being, say, a lack of confidence, being too, people using you, stepping all over you, not asserting yourself, then you can use it as a symptom. I assessed in this case he was too mild for what he needed to be. Too much mild. It was something that was making him suffer. So if it's something that either makes him or others suffer, you can use it as a mental symptom, but not as a simple personality trait.
Okay, and the same participant asks the following, Georgiana. She says, do you consider that this was a one-sided disease?
One-sided? No. No. No, there was quite a nice how can I say, spread of symptoms. There were mental, emotional symptoms, physical symptoms. So no, I don't think it was one-sided. One-sided usually means the whole case is there's only mental symptoms, for instance. So Hahnemann called it defective case.
Okay, so now we have another participant, sorry, Anne Sorel, and she asks, why 200 Cs? Is it level of health?
Why 200 C? Yes, potency is always a bit of a question mark for practitioners. In this case, I felt that the remedies were clear. So for me, potency is about clarity of the remedy. Also, he had been in a high group and he had just gone down to a bit of a low one. So he was able to handle a 200C is okay in level 7, especially with a clear remedy picture. And the effect will be much quicker than, say, using a 30C. So you just have to assess really, if the patient had been 20 years in group 3, you want to be careful about using a 200. The fact that it hadn't been that long and he was able to go back to his original health level. You can use a 200 or even possibly higher, but I think 200 is good.
Okay, so now we have another question from Meher Darani, and he asks if the bald patch improve after the treatment.
No, no, unfortunately not. It's this kind of male pattern baldness. It's a kind of genetic predisposition. It's not something that I've seen suddenly all grows back after silica. But certainly I remember from Professor Vithoulkas many years ago talking about when you see men with the hair that's missing here in the front, almost bald at the front, silica is usually the remedy to think of.
Okay, now we have another question. It's from Dr. K.N. Rama, and he asks, why didn't you use Lycopodium?
Lycopodium? Well, it wasn't indicated, so I didn't use it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we have another question from Naima, and the question is the following. I have a question about a return of old symptoms. Mm-hmm. Do we want an exact repetition of the original thing, or is a milder version okay?
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, a milder version is ideal, but sometimes you will get the full force of the original coming back. So it just depends. I don't quite know exactly what that depends on. Maybe potency, but sometimes, you know, for instance, with an eczema, you may find that it aggravates. If it's been suppressed a lot, it may come back full force. In this case, the returns were quite mild, milder than the original, which is ideal. Ideal.
Okay, so now we have another question from Dr. Arcana Dete, and he asks the following. Was there psorinum keynote in your patient? Filthy smell, odor of the body?
No, there wasn't any bad smell from him. That's true. It's a, mind you, these days we don't see so many smelly people. I don't know if that's your experience, but you know, people are a bit more aware of using the deodorants and things. You don't tend to get that. Only on the tube in London sometime, in rush hour. But yeah, so no, I didn't have that. And he didn't have the smelly feet, but that's more, you see that more in children than adults.
Okay. Now there's another question from Elias Afridi, and he asks the following. What if a patient used blindly homeopathic medicines and that developed so many symptoms and he approaches to a classical homeopathic doctor? How can he manage to cure the case?
Send him to someone else.
Correct.
No, seriously, it's an unfortunate situation that, but we see it quite a lot. And if you don't see a remedy, they have to go away and wait.
Yeah.
Can't treat them. Yeah.
Okay. Now we have another question. We have quite a few questions, Andrew.
Good.
So this question is from Flo. So she asks the following. She says, although there were quite a few pointers to silica, you never explored or took the specifics of the chronic fever as well. Periodicity, time when it could come in the day or night, perspiration. I don't know whether you understood what I said, because this is, let me just read it again, sorry. So she says, although there were quite a few pointers to silica, you never explored or took the specifics of the chronic fever. Periodicity, time when it would come in day or night, perspiration, etc.?
True. I went much more on generals and mentals in this case. If you see in the repertoire, I used periodicity as a general rubric. But the thing is, we don't, as far as I know, have, let's see. Yeah, we don't have periodicity of every 3 to 4 months. So you can't really use that. You have to use the general rubric of periodicity. And here you see silica again is in 3rd degree. Burrito is also there. So these two remedies are very close. So that's why. And the specifics of the fever, no, I think, not that I remember there were any, they were very mild, the symptoms. He had very mild fever, some headache, bit feverish, foggy head. I used this dullness. So I used what? I tend to not go into too much detail, but try to use the specifics or characteristics or peculiars in a case. So the hair on the tongue is much more useful than the fever symptoms.
Okay. So now we have Daniela, and she asks whether we can combine the rubrics timidity and timidity in public.
Yes, you could. Sorry, my cat.
Okay.
Yes, you could combine those, but yes, you could. Because timidity has more remedies in it, of course, and this is a smaller thing. So, of course, we know Burrito is very timid, and it is rather peculiar that it's not in timidity appearing in public. You'd imagine Burrito would hate that, but it's not in there so specifically. So you could merge those.
Okay.
With this merge facility. Yes.
Okay, so now Liaquat asks the following. After the finalization of the case, what changes were in the mind symptoms?
Yes, good question. I think I said at the end, we saw that, of course, he felt much better in himself. It's a very all-important thing. He felt in general, and that mentally he'd got his focus back. So this dullness, difficulty thinking, is cleared. Also, his worries about the illness, of course, because it had gone, and the future and his health had all then subsided. And he hadn't mentioned this initially, but he thought he was being singled out by God for this. This had also gone. So we had some very good, he felt more confident in general. So we saw some nice changes in his mental emotional state. Although I believe he would remain in his character to be rather mild as a personality.
Okay, so now there is Ashraf Sharafi, and he asks why silica acted only after 10 days and not earlier.
Yes, that's a good question. That's an unknown question. Answer. Indeed, why 10 days? Sometimes, all I can say on that is that in certain groups, the time it takes for there to be a reaction varies. So in upper groups, it's very fast. The lower you go down, that time for reaction increases. So in the third group, for instance, it could take up to 2 weeks for the reaction to come. And seeing as he was in third group, 10 days, I would have expected it within a week, but it took him 10 days, so maybe his energy was low. We don't exactly know the parameters of this still, but something like this, the higher the group, the quicker the reaction. And of course, the group is determined by the ability to have high fever.
Okay. Now, Lily Samardic also has already had two questions with you, but here's another one. If silica was reversing the symptoms and amelioration was made, why not give a 1M and push it through further? Or do the current symptoms need, to match silica?
Well, as I said in the previous answer, once the patient has left silica, you can no longer prescribe it. It won't act. In fact, it'll have a disruptive effect. So you wait. In this case, I could have waited. But actually, as I said, if you read 177 to 180 of the organ, you'll see this phenomenon that once the new picture has come, you have to prescribe on it. That's what pushes the case forward, not a repeat of silica.
Okay, so now I have another question, which is Nikita, and she asks, if the relapse is happening after amelioration, then why not give a higher potency?
Well, you can. I was always taught with a relapse that you should repeat the same potency at least once. And then if that doesn't have the desired effect, then go up to the next potency. But you could.
Okay. So again, this is about potency. This is Abdul Basit, and he says, in mental symptoms, high potency is preferred. That's a comment that he's made.
Mm-hmm.
Just
yeah.
So there is Serena Baxter, and she asks, why was the remark of being punished by God not a relevant symptom?
Well, he didn't mention it in the original case, only at the end. Once he was better, he said, oh, I used to think this. So he hadn't mentioned it, actually. It was just an interesting, I thought, comment he made, because we have a specific remedy with this, Kali Brahmatam. Can show you. Yeah. Singled out for divine vengeance, persecuted. This idea that somehow they're being punished.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't relevant because he didn't mention it. And after after this series of remedies, it went away anyway. So it's interesting. We might want to consider Serenum in that rubric now, because we have a case where that symptom's been cured. So something we need to make a note of for Compass. That maybe that symptom is one of Serenum as well.
Okay. So Corina Boutiu asks, should we expect the depression to come back?
Yes, good question, isn't it? Not necessarily, but seeing as probably his depression was suppressed with antidepressants, you may see it come back in the progression. We didn't see the shingles come back either. So quite why that is, I don't know. Maybe sometimes it's not necessary for certain things to come back. Maybe they weren't it wasn't suppressed as such. But yes, sometimes we will see a case where, for instance, the chronic febrile illness is better, and then we see a depression coming, and people may think, oh, that's not the direction of cure. But actually it is, because it's going back in the chronology. Now that depression may come and go by itself, or you may need another remedy to treat that stage, which was 2009. So it's possible in his case, it didn't come back.
Okay. So I think this will be the last question, Andrew. Let me just check if we have any more important questions. Okay, so the last one that I'm going to ask you is from Daniela. And she asks the following: do you use unmedicated globals, placebo, when the patient needs to wait before repeating the remedy?
I don't use them, but you could do.
Okay.
Yes, yes, no problem using them. If, especially in a very anxious or hypochondriacal patient who likes to take something and pills, you could certainly do that. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, and now we have, well, let me just, there's a new message that came up. Let me just see. Okay. So basically that's it. I mean, there are a couple more questions, but okay, I'll just give you the very, very last one. How do you decide when to have the next consultation? Do you suggest to your patients when to come back in?
Yes. Usually I'd say a month to 6 weeks for a follow-up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. In general, we've got lots of comments that the case was, again, very interesting. Well done, Andrew. It was really interesting. I mean, everybody's saying thank you and what an interesting case. And it helps to the knowledge and for people to get to know more on homeopathy. So that's it for the questions. I'm going to pass on to our dear Dr. Gary Smith, who is always ready to open and close our webinar. Gary, thank you so, so much for everything.
Thank you very much, Elena, and thank you, Andrew. That was a great case and some great questions and great discussion there afterwards as well. And thank you to everyone who has joined with us. It's great to see such a huge number of people joining us, which is very encouraging, and from so many different countries as well. And I can see colleagues from many different countries, including some of our dear friends actually from Ukraine. We've got some doctors that are working in a very difficult situation in Ukraine. So thank you so much for tuning in to be with us this afternoon. It just remains for me to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Vithoulkas Compass. Vithoulkascompass.com is one of the websites you should be looking at, and if you wish, you can get a free trial and then 20% discount. And if you're a member of the Faculty of Homeopathy, you can get a 25% discount. And contact Elena Abate, and there's the email address there. And next slide, please. And the Faculty of Homeopathy runs these webinars every so often. We look forward to seeing you in the next one. facultyofhomeopathy.org is the website of the Faculty of Homeopathy, so please visit that and contact us if you're interested in membership. And homeopathy.net is the third website I want to mention. Homeopathy.net is the website of the Homeopathy Journal, which is the faculty's international research journal, which is the only Medline listed journal in the world dedicated to homeopathy. So if you want to know what's what in terms of homeopathic research, definitely subscribe to that journal. And if you become a member of the Faculty of Homeopathy, that's part of your membership. So I think that's everything. Thank you, Vithoulkas Compass. Thank you, Andrew, for a great case, a great presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and all the great questions and the good discussions. And keep your eyes peeled, and we'll be back again, hopefully, God willing, for the next installment of this series in a few months' time. And we look forward to you joining us then. And in the meantime, please do keep in touch. Reach out to us either at Vithoulkas Compass or at the Faculty of Homeopathy, and we can continue this conversation, hopefully. So I think I'll close the webinar there, and thank you once again. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Just one thing before we close, regarding the free coupons that were given out for all participants to have free access to Vithoulkas Compass. Please be advised that these coupons will expire on the 15th of July. Therefore, from there onwards, you will have to purchase a subscription. And of course, we will give you the best prices possible. thank you again for being here and for really, as Dr. Gary Smith said, this was an enormous, we had quite a big participation. And also to our colleagues from Ukraine who are going through a very hard time. Our thoughts are with you and our prayers are with you, and we hope this will end very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.